Welcome back. In today's episode, I'm looking at bear attacks that turned fatal. From a man who spent 2 years hand-feeding a wild bear until one missing apple ended the routine in the worst possible way, to a photographer who crashed through the roof of a hidden bear den while searching for the perfect shot. But first, we begin with 3 wildlife workers whose routine morning assignment ended before they ever reached the camera they were sent to service. It was June 7th, 2026 in northwestern Montana, and the trail they normally used was washed out before they even reached the first bend. Aldrich Renshaw was 46 years old and had been working in wildlife management for more than 2 decades. He knew the backcountry the way people know a neighborhood they have lived in for years. Not perfectly, but well enough that comfort had settled in over time. His personal life had been harder than his work life for the past several years. A divorce had put distance between him and his 2 sons, and the previous night his former wife had called to tell him their older boy had been admitted to hospital in critical condition after an accident. Aldrich had told his crew he needed to finish one last assignment before driving to the airport. He had packed a bag before leaving the field station that morning. I think about that phone call the night before. His son in hospital, and he still showed up to do the job the next morning. That tells you something about the kind of man he was. Oswin Desai was 31 years old and had come to Montana from India after years of studying bears at university. And Coltrane Ruffey was 28 and had joined the team only a few months earlier. Before sunrise, the 3 of them left the field station to replace memory cards and batteries in a remote research camera positioned above a salmon stream. They had completed the same job several times that spring as part of an ongoing grizzly monitoring project. It was the kind of task that stops feeling like a task after you have done it enough times. The rain overnight had washed out part of the normal trail. Aldrich looked at the muddy section and suggested cutting through a thick patch of alder to go around it. It would save a few minutes, and the alder route would bring them out close to the camera site anyway. He forgot his bear spray clipped to the driver's door of the truck instead of transferring to his belt before they started walking. The camera site was close. They would not be long. That is something about dangerous environments I don't like. It does not eliminate the risk. It just makes it easier to forget the risk is still there. What none of them knew was that a sow grizzly had dragged the remains of an elk carcass into that same patch of alder during the night and had bedded down nearby with her 2 yearling cubs. Grizzly bears are acutely protective of food sources and will defend a carcass with the same intensity they bring to defending cubs, and both were involved in this case. The alder closed around them as they pushed through. Visibility dropped to a few feet in every direction. The stream was loud enough that conversation required raised voices. None of them heard anything before the sow came out of the cover at a distance too short for any of them to do anything useful with the seconds they had. The bear went for Aldrich first. The charge covered the remaining distance in under 2 seconds, and the impact of nearly 400 pounds hitting a standing person at full speed drove him backward off his feet and into the brush before he could raise his arms. She pinned him with her front paws and bit into the back of his skull. The cracking sound was immediate. He stopped moving after the second bite. Oswin had pushed sideways into the alder, trying to create distance, but the vegetation grabbed at her legs and slowed her within the first few feet. The sow covered the gap before she cleared the brush line. The first contact came at her shoulder and spun her into the ground. The bear bit into her upper back and broke her spine. Oswin could not move her lower body after it. She was still conscious and breathing when the sow left her. Coltrane made it further than either of them. He was pushing uphill through the lodgepole when she caught him at the back of the thigh and pulled him down the slope. He went face first into the ground, and she bit into the base of his neck once before something, a sound from the cubs, pulled her back toward the carcass. The bite tore deep into the muscles of his neck and shoulder, but missed the major blood vessel. Bleeding heavily wobbly and barely conscious. He remained motionless until the bear disappeared back into the alder. Other workers at the station grew concerned when the team did not return at the expected time and could not be raised on the radio. A search was organized and responders were sent into the area with the truck's last known coordinates as a starting point. They found Aldrich dead near the camera site. Oswin was still alive but critically injured and unable to move below her chest. Coltrane was found badly mauled, conscious, and suffering severe blood loss. Both survivors were flown to hospital. Despite emergency treatment, Oswin died from her injuries later that day. Coltrane underwent multiple surgeries and survived after a long recovery. The bear spray was still clipped to the driver's door. Aldrich had a bag packed for the airport. His son was waiting in a hospital, and the bear spray never left the truck. I cannot read this case without sitting with that for a long time. Wildlife officials who reviewed the incident noted that the detour through the alder had brought the team directly into a food defense situation at close range with no warning and no deterrent available. The sow and her cubs were located 2 days later in the same drainage and were relocated rather than removed. 3 people, 1 detour, and a bear that had been there all night. What happened to Sorrel started differently, with a woman who had gone further than most people are willing to go specifically to find something nobody else had. It was early December 2020 in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, and the trail she was on did not appear on any visitor map. Sorrel Vane was 34 years old and had walked away from a marketing job in March, telling people it was a sabbatical while privately working towards something she had wanted for longer than she admitted. She had spent years producing content for other people's brands and had decided she was done with it. The plan was to build a following around solo backcountry photography, the kind of content that required going further than most people were willing to go and coming back with images nobody else had. Yellowstone in early winter was supposed to be the centerpiece of that plan. Empty trails, dramatic light, no crowds, no boot prints in the snow. I respect what she was building. Trading a stable career to go somewhere cold and empty and make something that was actually hers, I understand why a person does that. She had driven out alone in a car packed with camping gear and no fixed return date, staying in a rented cabin outside the park boundary and driving in each morning before the light changed. She had found the access route on the satellite imagery while scouting for angles and the other photographers had not used. It was a service road that cut the approach to a ridge she wanted by nearly an hour, and it did not appear on the maps handed out at the visitor center. She had used it twice before without any problem and had come to think of it as one of the small advantages she had built through research that most visitors never did. That morning, she was chasing signal as much as scenery. She had already hiked to 3 different points with her phone raised, watching the bars flicker and drop, wanting to post her location before the light shifted. A ridge ahead looked more promising. Getting to it meant crossing a snowbank that had built up over a hollow in the slope, the surface crusted and firm looking, giving nothing away about what had been happening underneath it through weeks of freeze and thaw. I have walked across snow that looked solid and felt it shift underneath me, and the instinct in that moment is always to keep moving forward rather than back. I think that instinct is exactly what happened here. Sorrel broke through the snow to her waist. She had gone straight through the roof of an occupied den. Black bears in Yellowstone enter torpor in late autumn, their heart rate and body temperature dropping significantly as they wait out the winter in dens that are often dug into slopes or hollows where snow accumulates naturally above them. The bear inside came out of torpor the way any animal does when something drops into its space without warning. The attack that followed was fast and close range, and there was no distance between them to work with. She sustained severe lacerations to her arms and upper body as she attempted to pull herself out of the opening, and the bear pushed upward through the collapsed snow toward her. She was above ground and moving when she broke free, but the injuries she had already sustained were serious and the temperature was dropping. She had not told anyone which route she was taking that morning. Her sister had called twice, heard voicemail both times, and told herself Sorrel was probably out of range chasing a sunset shot the way she often was. It was not until the following afternoon, nearly 18 hours after Sorrel's last post, that the silence felt different enough to call the park. Rangers used a geotag from her final photograph to narrow the search area. From there, they worked outward through the surrounding terrain and considered nearby access points, including the service road that was closed to visitors during winter. They found the collapsed snowbank before they found her. She had made it approximately 40 yards from the den before the combination of her injuries and the cold had stopped her. 40 yards. She made it 40 yards on her own after everything that had just happened to her. I think about the kind of will that takes, and it genuinely moves me. Sorrel Vane was found deceased. Investigators established that the den collapse had been accidental and that the bear had responded defensively to a sudden intrusion at close range. The animal was not located for removal. Sorrel fell through something she could not have seen. Corvin's gaze is harder to sit with because he could see exactly what was happening for 2 full years before it ended the way it did. It was an October evening in 2022 in the hill country of Western Virginia, and the platform at the edge of the property had been there long enough that the wood had started to gray. Corvin Halley was 53 years old and worked remotely doing technical documentation for a software company. 11 years earlier, a divorce had left him wanting distance from people, and he had bought 40 acres backing onto national forest with the nearest neighbor a quarter mile off. He kept to himself and spent the first couple of years on the property in solitude, telling himself it was the life he had always wanted. The bear started showing up the way bears do, working the tree line in the evenings for whatever it could find. Corvin noticed himself looking forward to the sightings more than made sense. He was lonely in a way he did not talk about, and the bear had given his evenings something to organize around. Leaving out apple scraps was easy to justify at first. By the second summer, the scraps had turned into a routine, then hand feeding, and somewhere in there a story had built up around it, that the bear came back specifically for him, that it recognized his voice and his walk. It was easier to believe that than to believe it was simply showing up for apples. I think loneliness does something particular to the way people interpret animal behavior. It makes connection feel possible where the animal is not actually offering one. I do not say that unkindly. I just think it is true. The following started almost by accident. He posted a few phone videos mostly to have someone to show, and the response surprised him. People called it beautiful and called him brave. It was more warmth than he had received from anywhere else in years, and the platform he built, partly for better camera angles, became its own reason to keep going. Wildlife officials visited twice and said the same thing both times. He was training a wild animal to associate human hands with food, and that association ends badly. Corvin heard them both times and kept going anyway, quieter after the second visit, because by then the ritual was not really about the bear. It was the one part of his week that felt like it was working. I understand why he kept going after that second warning. When something is filling a space that nothing else is filling, you do not give it up because an official told you to. You find reasons to keep it. The evening Corvin ran out of apples. He walked to the platform on habit, already narrating to the camera the way he always did. American black bears are not domesticated, and the patterns that develop through repeated food conditioning do not reflect genuine habituation to humans. What they reflect is a learned sequence. Approach, receive food, move on. When that sequence breaks, the animal escalates the behavior that has previously produced the reward, applying more force the way it would to a branch that has not given up its fruit. The bear came up expecting the same open hand it had always found. The hand was empty. It pushed into the space where the apple should have been, and the force behind it was not calibrated for a hand with nothing in it. Corvin stumbled backward off the edge of the platform. The bear followed the motion, came down on top of him with its front paws, and the impact fractured his collarbone and 2 ribs on his left side. The bear bit into his left shoulder, and the force tore through the muscle down to the bone. Corvin could not get his arm under him, and the animal was still above him when he stopped being able to to call out. The camera kept the platform in frame for 6 more seconds after he stopped narrating. The bear's shoulder and head were still visible, working the space where his hand had been. A neighbor who followed the channel noticed the feed had gone silent mid-session and called for a welfare check the following morning. Responders found Corvan on the ground below the platform. He survived the initial injuries but died at the hospital 2 days later from complications related to the bite wound and internal bleeding. The bear was located and euthanized. Wildlife officials noted that the animal had done exactly what a food-conditioned bear does when the conditioning fails. It had simply kept doing the thing that had always worked before, with more force than the situation had ever previously required. The camera was still running when it happened. I have chosen not to describe it beyond what the investigation confirmed, because I think some things deserve to stay private.
Corvan built something that helped him feel less alone, and it cost him everything. What happened to Revna started from something much simpler. A moment of curiosity near a carcass that should have ended with her walking away.
It was 26th February 2020 on a remote fire access road in northern Idaho, and the temperature had been sitting below zero for most of the week. Revna Sol was 31 years old and worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Boise. She had started working in her teens to fund her own way through school and had spent the years since climbing steadily through the firm until a promotion had come through the previous month. It was the kind of thing she had been working toward for a long time, and she had decided to celebrate it by going somewhere remote and spending a few days alone in the kind of quiet that her working life did not leave much room for.
She had taken winter backcountry trips before was comfortable in the terrain. She packed her truck and drove north.
A promotion she had worked years toward, and the way she chose to celebrate it was to go somewhere completely alone and quiet. I think that says something real about who she was. Her boyfriend worked nights at a hotel near their apartment, and they kept different schedules that meant a full day could pass without either of them registering the other's silence. She had mentioned the general area she was heading to before she left, and said she might lose signal for stretches. He had not thought much of it because that was how her solo trips always went. She had been out for 2 days when she found the kill site. An animal had gone down recently, within the last day or two based on the condition of the carcass, and the snow around it had been heavily disturbed by something large. The track pattern around the site was unmistakable, even to someone without formal wildlife training. A grizzly had been feeding there and had cached the remains under a shallow covering of snow and debris, the way grizzlies do when they intend to return.
She stood at a distance and looked at it for a while, and then made a decision she could not take back.
She moved closer to get a better look. Grizzly bears that cache food are not simply storing it. They defend it actively and monitor the site from nearby cover. The bear had been bedded in dense pine cover 30 yards from the carcass. I think most people standing at that distance, looking at a carcass in the snow, would feel the same pull she did. Curiosity is not recklessness. It just became that in this specific moment. It came out of the tree line at a full run before she had time to back away from her closer position. She had bear spray in her jacket pocket rather than on her belt, and by the time she got it out, the bear had already covered most of the ground between them. The first strike knocked her backward into the snow. The bear bit into her right forearm as she brought it up, and the force snapped both bones in her lower arm. She got the spray discharged at close range, and the bear broke off and moved back toward the cache before disappearing into the tree line. She was alone, half a mile from the truck, with a broken arm and chest injuries that made breathing difficult. She made it back to the road, but not to the truck. Her boyfriend did not register anything wrong until the following afternoon when a friend asked if she had made it back yet. He remembered her mentioning the area before she left.
When he contacted the search team, what little he recalled was enough to narrow the starting point.
They found the truck on the fire access road by early evening. They found her a short distance away. She had died from a combination of the injuries sustained during the attack and exposure during the time it had taken her to reach the road. She made it back to the road. On a broken arm and chest injuries and below zero temperatures, she made it back to the road. And it still was not far enough. That is what follows me most about this case. The cache site was located during the investigation, and the bear was identified through tracks. Wildlife officials determined it had been defending a food source and the animal was not removed. Revna made it further than most people could have. Colvern's case started the same way, with a hunter coming back to something he had left behind, not knowing what had found it first. It was October 15th, 2019. In western Montana, and the mountains looked very serene and beautiful. Colvern Jensen was 54 years old and had spent nearly 2 decades working as a heavy equipment mechanic in the United Arab Emirates. He had left Montana in his mid-30s for a contract that paid well enough to justify the distance, and had stayed because the money kept being worth it and because his family needed the stability. He worked long shifts maintaining construction machinery in a climate that was nothing like home, and spent years telling himself he would get back to the mountains eventually. When he finally returned for good, he knew exactly what he wanted to do first. He had been hunting elk with his father since he was a boy, and those trips had stayed with him through every year he spent abroad, as a specific kind of memory that does not soften with time. Nearly 2 decades away, and the thing he came home to first was hunting with his father's memory still in it. I find something genuinely moving about that kind of loyalty to a place and a time. That fall was the first hunting season he had been home for in nearly 2 decades. He went out alone on the morning of October 15th, and by mid-morning he had successfully harvested an elk on a timbered slope several miles from the trailhead.
The animal was too large to pack out without help, and he covered the carcass with branches,
marked his location, and hiked back out, planning to return later with someone who could assist with the pack out. He had done similar things before and did not think much about leaving it. What he did not know was that a grizzly bear had found the elk in the hours he was gone. Grizzly bears are opportunistic feeders and will claim a carcass quickly once they locate it. Colvern came back to the site alone. He was moving through the timber toward the spot where he had left the elk when the bear came out of the thick brush at close range.
It had been bedded near the carcass, and Colvern had not seen it or heard it before he charged.
He had bear spray on his belt and got his hand to it, but the distance between them was too short for the spray to build an effective cloud before the bear reached him. The spray was on his belt, in the right place. He did everything the way you are supposed to, and the distance was still too short. I think about that a lot when people say just carry bear spray like it solves everything. The animal hit him across the upper left side of his body and drove him into the ground. It bit into the back of his neck and upper shoulder with enough force to fracture his left clavicle and tear through the muscle and tissue along the back of his neck. He managed to deploy the spray from the ground at near contact range, and the bear broke off and moved back toward the carcass. Colvern was conscious and got himself upright, but the neck and shoulder injuries were severe and he was losing blood. He had service on his phone at that elevation and called for help before he started moving. Search and rescue teams reached him on the slope approximately 2 hours after the call came in. He had remained near the site rather than attempting to hike out, and that decision likely extended the time available to treat him. He was airlifted to a regional trauma center where surgeons worked on the neck injury through the night. He survived the surgery but died 3 days later from complications related to the spinal damage caused by the bite. Investigators recovered the elk carcass and confirmed through tracks and other evidence that a grizzly had been feeding on it before the attack. Wildlife officials determined the bear had been acting in defense of a food source.
It was located and euthanized, given the severity of the contact.
He called for help before he started moving. He stayed put. He did everything right after the attack, and he still did not make it. That is the part of this case I genuinely struggle with. Colvern came home after 20 years, and the first thing he wanted was the mountains. The last person in this video also went to the water for the same reason, not for content or adventure, just for the quiet. It was July 22nd, 2018, near a salmon stream in Alaska, and the afternoon had been exactly the kind of day Osvern Tal had been saving toward for months. Osvern Tale was 58 years old and had spent more than 30 years teaching woodshop at a high school in rural Oregon before retiring. He was known as a patient man, the kind of person who fixed things rather than replaced them, and who found genuine satisfaction in quiet work done carefully. His wife had died 5 years earlier, and fishing had become the thing that helped most.
Not in the way he could explain to people who asked, but in a way that kept him coming back to it every summer.
I think most of us have something like that. Something we do not do for any particular reason, except that it helps. For Osvren, it was standing beside Alaskan water with a line in it. I understand that completely. He saved through the year for a trip to Alaska because the rivers there were different from anything closer to home, and the silence on the water was the particular kind he needed.
Friends invited him along on trips regularly, and he always declined. He preferred going alone.
He had been beside the stream since early morning, and by mid-afternoon had caught several salmon. Before packing up, he moved to the bank to clean the fish the way he always did at the end of a session, working through them methodically and leaving the remains at the water's edge while he gathered his gear. It was the kind of thing anglers do without thinking much about it, and Osvren had done it many times before without consequence. The smell carried further than he accounted for. Brown bears along Alaskan salmon streams are among the most food-focused large predators on the continent during summer and early fall. They can consume up to 20,000 calories a day during the hyperphagia period before winter, and their ability to detect food odor at distance is estimated at roughly 7 times greater than a domestic dog, which is already far beyond human range. A bear that detects the smell of fresh fish and fish remains will move toward the source directly and will arrive without the kind of warning that gives a person time to prepare. The remains sitting at the water's edge while he packed his gear, a routine he had done dozens of times before. That is what makes this one so hard to place blame on. There was nothing careless about it, just timing. A large brown bear had been working the stream further upstream and had been moving in Osvren's direction for several minutes before he saw it. He looked up from his tackle box, and the bear was less than 20 feet away. At that distance, there was no time to reach for spray or to back away far enough to change the dynamic. The bear charged almost immediately, closing the remaining distance in under 2 seconds. Osvren raised his arms and turned partially away, which absorbed the first strike across his upper back and shoulders rather than his head. The bear's paw drove him forward into the bank, and it bit into the back of his right shoulder, the force collapsing the joint and tearing through the muscle and tissue from the shoulder blade upward into the base of his neck. It struck him a second time across the left side of his head as he went down, the open paw contact alone causing a fracture above his ear. He lost consciousness before he reached the ground. The bear left the area shortly after. Osvren had told the outfitter he planned to be back at the pickup point by early evening. When he did not arrive and could not be raised on his radio, the outfitter contacted wildlife authorities and a search was organized before dark. Responders reached the stream and found the fish cleaning site, the scattered gear, and Osvren nearby. He had not regained consciousness. He was airlifted to the nearest trauma center, but the head injury and the blood loss from the shoulder wound had caused damage that treatment could not reverse. Osvren Tale died the following morning. Investigators examined the site and confirmed through tracks and the direction of approach that the bear had been drawn toward the fish remains from upstream. The cleaning site, the timing, and the smell that had been sitting at the water's edge while he packed his gear had combined in a way that brought the bear in close before either of them knew the other was there. The outfitter who had dropped him off, told investigators Osfrin had fished that stream before and had always come back with a full cooler and very little to say about the day. He said that was the point of the trip for him, that the silence was what he came for.
The outfitter said he always come back with very little to say about the day.
That was the point for him. I think that is one of the most human things I have read while putting this video together. It was quiet enough out there. It had just stopped being safe.